Let me just make a few remarks. I'm going to look at some of the arguments. First of all, just a couple of the arguments that Michael talked about. But mainly the big fact. I didn't realize that there was a movie.
He does that.
Well, there should be a movie. But in any case, the idea, and I do think, Michael is right that it may be in a certain way not so important whether or not there are some chinks in the armor, whether or not there are some aspects of Spinoza's system that turn out not to be intelligible in terms of the PSR. It does, it seemed to me, mildly undermine your reading if things like the two attributes, the division between substance and attributes, etc., isn't explicable in terms of the PSR, but that's not a big deal. On the other hand, I do think that what I call sort of the abyss of ignorance at the center of the system as a pretty big deal. And when I teach the ethics, we always begin with the appendix to part one because it's much more engaging than definition one, definition two, definition three, et cetera, and students can really, I think, and also philosophers, really get into the denial of final causes, and the denial of anthropomorphism that's at the center of that. But what I read it, and here, in a way, I'm following Leibniz's reading of Spinoza when he first encountered it, while Spinoza was still alive, was that he saw in this passage, in this idea, the very dark idea that the world really is, at a fundamental level, unintelligible to us. There are no purposes. There is no meaning in the world, and this was a dark and terrifying vision for him. And that's what it is that I see there. Now, as far as Michael's argument, insofar as I understand it, about Harry and Eunice, the idea is that, well, if it's conceivable that Eunice follows from God's nature, Eunice, we're assuming, is not internally inconsistent the way in which a round square is. So it is conceivable that Eunice could have followed from God's nature. It's conceivable that Eunice could have followed from God's nature. Then you can run the ontological argument on the nature of God conceived in such a way that Eunice follows from the nature of God, and there would be two gods, therefore, and Spinoza is obviously not going to admit that. I think that the problem with that as a response is that you can't move from, well, we can conceive of Eunice is following from God's nature to you can run the ontological argument on it. Because that conceivability is not a metaphysical conceivability, but an epistemic. For all we know, we don't know what it is. If Spinoza were to say it's conceivable that Eunice follows from God's nature, by that he would mean we simply do not understand what it is in God's nature that prevents Eunice from following. And so you can't then run the ontological argument on that. For Spinoza, contingencies are epistemic, strictly speaking, and not metaphysical. So I'm still left with the conviction that for Spinoza, ultimately, it's a root fact that the nature of God is such that it entails Harry, but it doesn't entail opportunist, but we can continue to talk about that. Now, as far as the methodological differences go, Michael, in a certain sense, is attempting to, I think, draw the two of us together, which I appreciate very much. I still think that there are important ways in which we're different. Is Michael's reading more holistic than mine? Well, in a certain sense, it is. Because Michael, I think, I understand, the project is to find a single key that will sort of unlock the whole system, and in which you can see all of the parts of it as in one way or another responsive to that project of working out the consequences of the PSR. I don't think that there is that kind of a key in Spinoza. Now, there are philosophers for whom that may be true, contemporary and historical. But I just don't think that Spinoza is one of them. I see, if there is a key, it's probably, given the metaphysical insight of, say, Ethics 1, and the idea that we do live in a world in which there is no meaning, in which, which is radically contingent. How should we as human beings live? That if there's a key, it's something more like that. But even then, I'm not sure that it's right to see one single motivation. Now, Michael is absolutely right that the real Spinoza is the Spinoza whose actions and statements can be rationalized, can be made intelligible. That's what we do as interpreters. That's what we do as historians of philosophy, is to try to make these obscure and difficult texts intelligible. And the ethics is about as obscure and difficult as it gets, for those of you who've tried to crack it. But there are going to be different ways in which to do it. Michael's strategy is trying to find something like the PSR that can sort of unlock the whole system. My strategy is, I hesitate to use, I think in your response to me, you actually call my strategy atomistic, which I think is not entirely accurate, but certainly more varied than yours. You're trying to sort of reduce it all to, you're trying to find, I think, the sort of diamond that is hidden underneath all of these different parts of it. The one crystal, hard, shiny thing that will sort of make sense of it all. I'm not sure that there is one. I'm trying to tell, my narrative is more of a story of Spinoza beginning in the late 1650s. We actually have a document, the short treatise, that probably represents the first sort of organized attempt at putting together his ideas, watching him grow and develop, and seeing his work in terms of these are his goals, these are his motivations, this is what it is that he attempts to do, these are the problems that he finds, these are the changes that he then introduces. And this is the way in which I like to read the history of philosophy. It makes things intelligible, but in a rather different, in a rather more narrative sense than perhaps strictly philosophical sense. Though you can take, it seems to me, a particular text at a particular time and find the kind of thing that you're looking for in it. But that's, I think, the difference in but that's perhaps one way of understanding the difference in the way in which we're trying to make it intelligible. And finally, on your subversive footnote, which wasn't, I think, in the text that we're going to publish. Well, the footnote was, but not the development. That there is no distinction between the study of the history of philosophy and the pursuit of philosophy itself. Well, there certainly are ways of doing both philosophy and the history of philosophy in which that's true. And I think that those are and that those are interesting and can be worth doing if they're done well. On the other hand, I think there are ways of doing philosophy independently of the history of philosophy. I think you always do philosophy better if you have some awareness of what it is that's gone on in the past, which I think speaks for why it is that I think it's really important for philosophy departments, even those that are focused on contemporary philosophy, to teach history and have people, on the faculty, in the room, who will remind you about things that happened in the past. I think that's really good for contemporary philosophy. But not every contemporary philosopher has got to be himself or herself a historian. On the other hand, I kind of think that there is an interesting way in which you can do history of philosophy independent of contemporary philosophy. And there should be at least some people around who do. Because I think that one of the, I sometimes characterize what I do as a kind of intellectual tourism. I like to go back into strange places in the past and meet the people there and talk with them and find out their strange views of the world and try to understand what they're doing in their own terms. And particularly how it is that what they're doing is maybe something rather different from what it is that we're doing. And I think having at least some people around, maybe not everybody, who is interested in approaching the past in that way to find out not the continuities, but actually the discontinuities, can be interesting and important. And I think I'll leave it there.
So this way we'll open up for discussion. We've got an hour for discussion, so we'll call.
Okay, I'm pleased and struck by the intellectual tourism image. Makes sense to me. But it suggests to me a question about a possible methodological approach which might arise from that, which is, how when you go abroad for an extended period of time, and then you come home, everything seems weird?
Yeah.
I mean, it seems to me that could be a really good reason for studying the history of philosophy. And that's the sensation that I most treasure about. And I don't know which of you that favors more. Which of you has been affected more in that way, in your view of the present, by traveling in the past? I've noticed this affected Michael, but I'd like to hear what either or both of you would say about that. It seems to be a little different from one.
What effect, what?
Well, that when you go to the past, we think we know what our problems are.
Yeah.
But I think one of the good things about studying the past is discovering, no, we don't know what we're talking about at all. The words that are coming out of our mouths, the very problems we think we're referring to, we're not conceiving them right. We don't understand what we ourselves are talking about. I mean, I liked the, what's her name, the woman who's in Princeton, her book on the problem of evil. Evil. Yeah, Susan Neiman. I mean, it's sort of, in a way, a popular book. It's written for undergraduates and so on. But I like the book because I think she said, sort of shakes us and says, what about the problem of evil? That is to say, and it seems to me one of the good things is that you notice that the problem of evil hasn't actually gone away. Even when, and it's still there, even when we don't think of it as being present. And I think there are other things like that, that inform our problems and we're not really aware of the way they do.
Do you want to answer that first, or what?
I can say something. I mean, I like what you said, Ron, that we don't even understand our own problems because we haven't gone into the history of philosophy. I think that's right. So that's what I was saying. At the end, the meaning of our own views is fixed to some extent by these earlier views. So it's in a way, I don't like the tourism analogy because I think actually you're actually going home in a sense when you study these exotic texts, because then you understand what you yourself really meant all along. So I think there's a closer connection. So the tourism thing is like, you can't be a tourist all the time. You go there for a couple of weeks and come back. I think that the two are more integrated. I think that's the holism.
Well, when I go abroad, I usually spend longer.
Well, yeah.
You can become an expat,
Yeah.
an intellectual expat as well. But,
Yeah. So I want to have a view that, this is now purely about methodology, but I think that the study of the history of philosophy is not kind of thing that, hey, it could be useful to have someone around who's sort of been at these exotic places to tell us about it. It's actually much more integral to actual pursuit of philosophy. So I can see logic, maybe, or maybe not, but I think that in general, the two are really much more deeply connected. That's what I was trying to suggest at the end, anyway. So my subversive footnote is something that I knew Dan would disagree with, which is why I put it in. But it's something that I think it's sort of maybe an ideal for me, but I think that the two should be much more integrated. Because otherwise what you have is that it's sort of a separate but equal. This contemporary philosophy, and then there's history of philosophy, and they're doing interesting things, and they have their own spheres, right? But you know what? When it's separate but equal, how well did that work out in the United States? It's as if then history of philosophy will at best be tolerated, but won't be central. And I think actually the two are much more closely connected.
Well, I think history of philosophy isn't central to contemporary philosophy. And we're in, as historians of philosophy, I think that we are in a kind of, this is not directly answering your concerns, but just what Michael said, we are in a very curious position. People sometimes say, why aren't you in a history department? And the answer is, I would be comfortable there. Because my work
No one
is...
says that to me.
I actually spend a fair amount of my time in the history department and also with literature people, because I do think that at least the kind of work that I do does have significant overlap. I think it's good to be in the philosophy department because history of philosophy, unlike other kinds of intellectual history, does really require philosophical training. You have to know what an argument is, how to handle it, how to recognize philosophical positions, distinguish them from one another, which people who don't have philosophical training don't always do. On the other hand, I really admire the ability of some of my colleagues in history departments to be able to mess through archives and actually find something interesting, which I could never do.
I admire that ability too, a lot.
Yeah, but that's a different kind of skill that's also relevant. Now, being an intellectual tourist means, in part, going to some other place and really, well, what's important, what I learned, one of the things that you learn when you go to another country, particularly a rather different country, and see people whose lives are different, who eat different food, who take different things for granted, is you go back to your own country and you realize, there's another way of doing things. That what we do here isn't, is historically conditioned by, all sorts of contingent things. And you can begin to envision that you may still think that this is a pretty good way of living here, but there are other ways. One of the things that I learned when I go back to historical texts and historical periods is philosophy is itself a historical and cultural artifact. That it wasn't the same 400 years ago. That the questions that they were looking at weren't the same. That the domain wasn't the same. And it does have an effect on the way in which I think about what it is that's going on in contemporary philosophy. And I think that people who've studied the history of philosophy and then come back to contemporary philosophy will realize that some of the boundaries are artificial. Some of the assumptions that we make are, you can ask, is this an appropriate assumption to make? Is this an appropriate way to frame a question or to think about what it is that we're doing?
Right. I mean, it does seem to be that one way to put it, though, is when I read your work, and I learn things from it, and I often do, I think of it as historicist, in the sense that, in the way you were saying just now, that culture is determined by, by context, by things that have happened. And I guess case of some other facts about human mind.
I think it definitely may be, well, in certain fields, at a greater distance. You must know Chapin and Schaffer, Leviathan and the Air Bomb. They attempt to sort of embed in the strongest possible sense Boylean science and the science of the Royal Society in the context of the Restoration, politics, and society. And I think that that's going a bit overboard.
Although they also use Hobbes to challenge.
Yeah, well, yeah, exactly.
You know, to mount a philosophical challenge.
Right,
against-
although their reading of Hobbes is appalling.
Maybe, but.
But on the other, you know, you look at somebody like, I think that they're going too far. On the other hand, you look at Hobbes's politics, and it is impossible, I think, not to relate that in some way or another to the English Civil War and what was going on then, and to the fact that he spent a large part of the time while he was working on his politics in absolutist France, right? I mean, if you don't put that philosophy in that context, it seems to me that you're probably missing something important. On the other hand, Descartes' geometry, or Descartes' even I think the metaphysics of the Meditations may be at a little bit of a distance from the cultural context in which he was working. Although, you know, you have to think of Montaigne, and, you know, but that's more of an intellectual context, I think, than.
So just answers just the question of how I got from exploring these historical texts. I think the primary thing that I've gotten is that conviction that a lot of the way in which contemporary philosophy is conducted is just wrong. It's just on the wrong track. It's made a retrograde movement, actually. And I don't see that as coming out of Dan's approach so much, whereas, again, sort of the separate approach. And that's something that I find from engaging in the way that I do with historical text, that, well, this not only suggests a different way of doing things from what's going on now, but actually that different way is better than what's going on now. And for certain reasons having to do with the inherent conservativeness of people, they haven't appreciated the lessons from history of philosophy. That's, so again, that's more of a pointed tourism method where I come back and want to change things in contemporary philosophy.
Evan, do you want to jump in on this conversation, or? Ken?
A very short question for both of you. Would the world's being, can the world be intelligible in Michael's sense and yet be without meaning in Dan's sense? Or would being intelligible in Michael's sense confer meaning upon it in your sense?
I think the latter. I mean, if the principle of sufficient reason were as universally applicable as Michael says, then Spinoza, there wouldn't be this sort of dark hole in the middle of Spinoza, I think. That I think is a genuine point of disagreement about how to read Spinoza.
There are dark holes and there are dark holes, right? There are kinds of dark holes. And I think that one thing that I thought I didn't go into as thoroughly in the book as I should have gone is Spinoza's critique of teleology. And I think I just limited it to divine purposiveness there. But I agree with you that Spinoza, no means no. I should and that Spinoza rejecting all teleology. So he's rejecting all purposiveness, even in human actions. We may think we're acting for purposes, but we're not. It's just a sufficient cause of moving us along. So that's the view. Now, it's a strictly no teleological view. And so that's, I think, part of what Leibniz meant by its meaninglessness. But I wouldn't put that black hole as one that's a utter contingency, because they're not all absolutely necessary for Spinoza. So it's necessity without purposiveness. And so So is it a black hole? Well, it's a black hole of no teleology, but it's not a black hole of contingency. Rather, it's a black hole of complete necessity. Now, does that mean it make a meaningless universe then?
Well, but the thing is, there can be a necessary brute fact.
Right, but for me, it's not just, there are no brute facts in it, so it's a necessary, and there are no brute facts in that.
And that's where it is that we differ.
Yeah, it seems to be a deep difference, and maybe this is a vocabulary foreign to both of you, but you seem to me, Dan, to be enforcing a fact-value distinction in Spinoza, or insisting on a fact-value
A fact-value distinction.
Yeah,
So,
well, in your analysis of perfection, for example, it's reality or ontological fullness rather than anything with an axiological.
right, but I mean, Spinoza, that's how Spinoza defines perfection.
Right, and if you agree that he's anti-teleology, and if value is inconceivable, or objective value is inconceivable, apart from objective teleology, then you have to lose value once the teleology was lost. And I guess I'm interested in whether this is another opposition between you, because Michael, in addition to being a principle kind of guy, is an anti-bifurcation kind of guy. But here's the most important bifurcation, right? The one between fact and value. And is that,
Spinoza in the
we've talked a lot about facts, broadening the scope of the DSR to encompass facts, and I just wonder how, for both of you, values fit in.
Well, what Spinoza seems to say, and here I'm thinking about the preface to part 4 of the Ethics, is that, ultimately, the only value is that which promotes one's conatus, your continued existence, and that which is inconsistent with your continued existence. And what he says there is, ultimately, the values that we see in the world are just simply impositions of that onto the world, and there are no objective values other than that.
I think there's no fact value distinction. It shouldn't surprise you. That would be a bifurcation that is no life. So any kind of bifurcation, the unprincipled distinction between things. I think any kind of fact value distinction would be unprincipled. I think that, does that mean the world is meaningless and without goodness and stuff? No, I think there's a notion of goodness in Spinoza. So just after the preface of part 4, in definition 8 of part 4, Spinoza identifies virtue and power. So that's where the facts and values are coming together. Virtue. I think that Spinoza has a version of the convertibility of being and goodness, which you get in medieval philosophy. So that to be is to be good, as it were.
Right, but the emphasis is on the being. And it's in a certain way, it's eliminating the goodness.
Well, one man's elimination is another man's something else. So Spinoza can be seen in these negative ways where, like, we strip goodness and rightness and meaning from the universe, or we have, no, meaning and goodness suffuses the whole, as it were. And so this is pure being. And so really where we get things that are bad is in limitation, negation, right? And so we see things from our finite points of view. But everything is under an aspect of eternity. And from the eternal point of view, all is good. God is perfectly good because God is perfectly powerful. So in other words, the world is full of goodness. And so we we're getting rid of the goodness by making a distinction and seeing things from a finite point of view.
Well, it's full of perfection, which is simply to say it's full.
But that's what goodness is. It's fullness, that's what goodness is.
See, we can go on like
But
this.
you're getting at that.
But I mean, we shouldn't forget that Spinoza doesn't think this is a perspective that's suitable for everyone.
What perspective?
The one you just
This point of
expressed.
view of eternity?
Yeah, I mean, the theological political treatise
Oh, yeah.
is full of arrangements for people to find meaning in the way that Garber is recommending. And
Right.
Not everyone can do that, and even Spinoza can't do that.
Well, in the end, as I read the TTP, ultimately, one takes refuge in an anthropomorphic conception of God. and all of the sort of things that he dismisses in the ethics as superstition. You know, that is, if you look in chapter 14 at the dogmas of universal faith, it's the superstitions that he is eliminating.
Right, but that's not for philosophers.
No, that's for people who can't take the truth, who can't understand.
Can't handle the
Who
truth.
can't handle the truth, that's right.
This is also a question about the subversive footnote. Sympathetic to where you ended up, but skeptical at the route of getting there via the holistic theory of meaning. So as I took it, we're supposed to end up with this methodological conclusion, right? People pursuing contemporary philosophy and history of philosophy ought to be paying more attention to one another, right? Because contemporary texts can, in principle, help fix the meaning of historical ones and vice versa. Right? It seems to be the way that you got to contemporary texts can help fix the meaning of historical texts and vice versa was via this general principle that any text can help fix the meaning of any other text. And
Anything.
yeah, but we wouldn't want the more general methodological lesson that not only should contemporary philosophers and historians of philosophy be paying more attention to each other, but they should also be paying more attention to cookbooks and bird watching guides and climate. And so it seems that there need to be some way to restrict the methodological lesson, even if we have the holistic theory of meaning. I don't know how we're going to do that, but however it is, I suspect that then that's going to leave room for blocking the route to the methodological conclusion in this case. So if it turns on the idea that, well, contemporary texts and historical texts are basically treating the same issues, then Dan's worries about, well, not worries, but claims about discontinuities would also provide a route for blocking your argument for the methodological conclusion. The same way that we could say, actually, no, we don't need to be paying attention to the bird watching guides. If there are sufficient discontinuities, maybe we'd be able to say, no, you don't need to be paying sufficient attention to them.
Right.
History or contemporary philosophy.
So one thing I was trying to do is just to get on the board by saying, look, historical texts would be relevant to contemporary and vice versa, right? Now, the way I did that, it might open up this kind of extreme conclusion that everything's relevant to everything. And so you have to look at baseball cards and cookbooks and rocks and whatever, right? And everything's relevant. And in the end, metaphysically, that's where I'm going, right? Because it's the radical no differentiation view, right? But until we get there, at least along the way, we've seen the relation to history and philosophy is going to be less sharp and divided.
You're not strengthening your case when you say
No. Okay, so the most common question I get is that, why isn't your conclusion a reductio of your account, right? And so I'm going to say, Dan was much too nice to say that. And in a way, that's, I'm willing to go all that way, because it's going to be a radical monism, the radical holism and radical monism is going to get rid of any distinctions, and it's going to get rid of certain kinds of reasoning and any kinds of relations, and right, so there's a whole Bradleyan background to all this. So I'm going to a radical place, but I just have a little stopping place along the way where it might seem that the history of philosophy and philosophy are more integrated than one might have thought. I'm going to go further. I don't think there's going to be a principled way to, in the answer to your question, I don't think there's a principled way to exclude anything from being relevant to the meaning of anything. So then, and I'm going to face those consequences, right? But I just, one of the stopping point along the way where it might seem as if they're truly more connected. And then this might give an encouragement to them, but then of course he can do what he wants because he doesn't want to go where I want to go.
To the radical monism, no.
No, I knew that, all right. But then I want to say, so then I present my view as a skeptical challenge. It's a skeptical argument. In much the same way that Kripke's argument in the Wittgenstein book is a skeptical challenge, right? And that's actually, so it's a radical monism, radical holism combined with skepticism, as it were. I'm denying things that we might think are intuitively very obvious, but you can stop me if you can show me a reason where to draw on in principle, and I'd be very happy to hear how that would go.
Just really quick, I didn't see how the relevance of contemporary philosophy to history of philosophy was a stopping point along the way.
Right.
To the most, I thought the way that you argued for it was starting with the pretty extreme conclusion that everything's relevant to everything, and then as a special case of that.
Yeah.
Contemporary texts might be relevant.
That's a good point. So I did sort of the stopping point on the ways declining and Davidsonian arguments for their versions of radical holism. And if you take those seriously, without invoking the more general metaphysical deliberations that I invoke, and you extend those, or see what's behind them, so that might be a stopping point that help us see that the history and contemporary connection might be what it is. But you're right, I mean, so really what's behind it is the more general arguments, so, which eliminates distinctions altogether, so.
Hey, so one of the most exciting moments, I guess, in your paper was when you said that we can use Spinoza to get ourselves away from the atomism and realism that dominates philosophy.
Yeah.
So you're reading Spinoza as resistant to atomism and realism, and I think you're right.
Okay.
And I think that insight maybe shows us one way, and one new way of challenging the way we read Spinoza.
Okay.
Because so let's look both at the weak PSR and the strong PSR.
Okay.
So we translated race as thing.
Yes.
And that's a choice you don't have to make. I mean,
Okay.
another way we could take away race is that it means issue or concern or something that's available to thought. So actually, some of the views about Spinoza are almost analytic. The meanings of these Latin terms. To be a race is already to be available to thought.
Right.
Existere, there is some story you told there. To exist is to stand before intellect. So I'm really on board with
Okay.
idealism, but I think that the word thing should be handled with care. The word fact is even worse, though. Fact really comes out of the atomistic, realistic picture you're trying to set. And I want to put this question to you. What about I think the word fact isn't useful for thinking about Spinoza.
It's not very common in Spinoza.
He doesn't use it, so what about...
In fact, isn't very common, you know, in the end of the 17th century. in philosophy.
Lorraine Dassin has this really cool paper arguing that the concept of the fact was invented in the 17th century, or he gives us reason to doubt whether all 17th century philosophy did it. I want to just put this question to you. What about the fact that, the fact that there are no unicorns? Do we want to attribute that fact, do we want to put that fact in Spinoza's ontology? My suspicion is that it's so hard to put it in the ontology, it's going to show us that the concept of the fact is not useful. And if the concept of the fact isn't useful, then we should attribute the strong PSR to Spinoza.
So is there a state of God of there being no unicorns, as it were? Right?
Yeah.
So you might think that a negative state like that has no reality at all. The negative facts, I mean, lots of ontologies have problems with negative facts anyway. So that wouldn't itself, the fact that Spinoza had a problem with negative facts wouldn't be anything too surprising, given that lots of views of facts have problems with negative facts. But the point that Dan made is that, well, do we want to attribute an ontology of facts at all to Spinoza? Right? He does have sentences with that clauses, and that clauses seem to correspond to facts, but perhaps it doesn't have to be read that way.
Well, I mean, that's different from saying that these are intelligible, and that he uses them, and to say, well, are they modes, are they substances? Where do they fit in Spinoza's ontology?
Yeah, they have to be one or the other. If they're,
Can I say something about that? Proposition 11, demonstration 2 passage that really so much of your reading is really based on. Part of why it is that I'm skeptical about reading race in a really broad way is the specific application of that clause is to the question of the existence of a particular thing, which is to say, God, right? A substance, actually, but there must be assigned a cause or reason both for the existence of that particular thing. Now, there is no place in the ethics where Spinoza appeals to this principle in any other way. And for that reason, I'm a little skeptical about giving it the enormously expansive reading that your interpretation seems to require.
okay, I think I want to make 3 points. One is that Spinoza said, if he said it, he said it. In fact, he may not have cited it in that form elsewhere, doesn't mean that he didn't mean it when he said it.
Oh, I'm not suggesting that he didn't mean it, he meant it, but the question is what it is that he meant when he said it.
Right, and so it's hard to tell, and I'm open to Rafi's view that we can't, we treat the notion of race as problematic, and not clear what Spinoza meant, it may not apply to facts.
Yeah.
Other thing, I do place a lot of weight on 1P11D2, but I also place a lot of weight on Axiom 2 of Part 1, and so that, and there are passages that Martin Lynn brings to bear
Yeah.
that I want to rely on. And the third point I want to make is that it's interesting, in answer to Rafi's question, that in 1P11D2, there's got to be a reason or a cause, both for the existence and for the non-existence of what doesn't exist. So there, he's appealing to something negative, right? And so there'll be a reason for the non-existence, and that sounds like it could be for there not being any unicorns. So Spinoza may have problems with negative facts, but he's really jumping right into some non-being.
There has got to be a reason why it is that Eunice doesn't exist.
Yeah.
And that, it seems to me, is a pretty clear application of this, that I would have no objections to.
Yeah. He has whatever is strong or weak or fact or theology, has both a positive and a negative PSR, which is a strong.
Do you want to follow on this?
So this connects with what Rafi was talking about, the issue of facts being somewhat alien to
Yeah.
Spinoza's vocabulary. It's not part of his vocabulary. When I looked at it, currently there's only one use of fact, and it's not a technical use.
Yeah, just something that you
So now one might still say, well, it's okay to talk of facts because Spinoza we ourselves may understand facts in a quite deflationary way.
Yeah.
Something like is the fact that X is F, holds of things, whatever, if and only if X is F. It's a very deflationary notion of fact. If there can be negative fact, also that's by this kind of feeling. Now, of course, when we take it this way, if we can say you formulate PSI in terms of not for facts, but just in say for any key, the sentence there's a complete explanation of sufficient reason for P is true or something like that. But if we try to formulate it this way, we'll have to either state this thesis in using substitution occasion or quantify the sentence position, however we.
Yeah.
Neither of which, of course, are tools available.
And it wasn't going on Spinoza.
This kind of theory, though, it makes talk of facts further without ontological. We can talk about like that ontological movement is not available.